Thanks for joining us. Here's our agenda. We'll have a land acknowledgement and then a welcome from our board member, Louis Alemayehu, and from our executive director, Julia Nerbonne. Then we'll hear from McKenzie Jones from the USDN on resilience hubs. We're excited to hear from Dr. Estelle Montgomery from the Faunteroy Community Enrichment Center. And then we'll hear from our own Community Climate Resilience Network team, Joshua Lewis and Brett Pence. We'll have a little time for you to discuss some of the information you're hearing, and then we'll let you know what's ahead for 2025. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Alemayehu, who is on our board of directors for our land acknowledgement.
The land acknowledgement that I'm about to do reflects the fact that I've lived in Minnesota most of my life now and have a long time intimate relationship with the indigenous people in our region. So with that, I will begin. We are all busy being born, and we are all busy dying here. Yet there is no end to it all in the circle of life here. No beginning, no end, and from the living mud beneath our feet to the countless, endless starry constellations up above our heads and all around us on this infinitely small spinning blue-green orb. On this living speck, we are all home here. We can call her Mother. As South African master musician Hugh Masekela sang long ago, there are seeds to sow. In this part of the world, we are on the homeland of the Dakota and Anishinaabe people of what is now called Minnesota and Wisconsin. The history of these peoples are well over 30,000 years old. Here is my understanding at this time. All of the tribal lands, all of the tribal names of what is actually called Turtle Island means some version of the people. They are all related, though stretching from Alaska to the most southern tip of what is commonly called South America. Before coming here, the Anishinaabe were located in the northeastern area of what is called the United States, in the southeastern area of what is now called Canada. And as I said, this is Turtle Island. The invasion of Europeans caused the Anishinaabe to flee west along what is called the St. Lawrence Seaway, guided by prophecy delivered at sacred council fires along the way, until they arrived at northeastern Minnesota and were told to remain here because their journey was now over. For generations, there were conflicts between the Dakota and Anishinaabe peoples. But a gift of a drum from the wise and yet war-weary Dakota to the Anishinaabe became a peace offering that's still unfolding. In this more recent current historical moment, two of my dear friends from those two nations became husband and wife. Dakota tribal chief David and Valerie Larson, tribal elder of the Cass Lake Band of the Anishinaabe. David was tribal chair of the Lower Sioux Reservation when he and I worked together with others, facilitating anti-racism workshops using the process of the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. They were based in the Mississippi Delta in the city of New Orleans. We worked in collaboration. We worked in we worked in collaboration multiracially and multiculturally across Minnesota in the 1980s into the 1990s. Generations ago, a gift of a drum was given to the Dakota people, to the Anishinaabe, and a hard-won peace began. David and Valerie's love was one of the special manifestations of that peace process, actually started generations before they were born. The urgent and necessary work of the 21st century now is that all of us, from the four directions, reclaim and practice our indigenous wisdoms and values in harmony with the original people of this land. We are in a prophetic time, in a prophetic place on the Mississippi River. Gather now in radiant humility, wounded and too often lost and unaware of the Creator's master plan. For a new world, there are seeds to sow, as loving energy that tells us we need to heal and we can also do better. Through our often brutal transgressions, denial, and blind spots, once we know that somehow, in some way, all of our individual stories have common roots in the heart of the earth, connecting all animals, vegetations, and nations. I am because you are, we are all relations. May all of us, with humility and courage, stride together through the hard times and the good times, our eyes full of dawn, in a fierce and sweet metamorphosis, realizing we need to release our egos, embracing the one. May it be so.
Thank you so much, Louis, for those words and for grounding us in the place that we are. My name is Julia Nerbonne, and I am the Executive Director of Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, and part of the director team of the Climate Justice Commons. What a time that we are gathering here on this planet Earth. There's fires that are still raging in Los Angeles. We've just gotten news that the US has withdrawn not only from the Paris Agreement, but from the World Health Organization. We hear about the dissolution of justice programs across the federal government. Our trans neighbors are afraid of the rights that they have being rolled back. And we have folks who are afraid to leave their homes because of where we are on immigration. Yesterday, Louis and I had the opportunity to host some kids on our block for a conversation about Martin Luther King. And of course, secondarily, about the inauguration and how we were going to be in the next few years. It was a beautiful conversation. And we started with a video of the I Have a Dream speech, and we talked a little bit with the kids about Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott. And although the power of the civil rights movement was definitely present, the focus of the conversation actually turned to something even more important to these children, which was how was it that those people back in the 60s were able to organize to take care of each other? How did it work for people throughout a whole year to be able to support getting people, their neighbors, to work? How are we going to create a safe space for these children and for all of us in the years to come? We talked about exchanging phone numbers. We talked about what it was going to look like, the places that kids would go after school, how they would build community. So I thought that felt like a really good way to open up this this year where we're going to be diving into resilience at Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. So I'm going to share a metaphor with you from a book called Resilience Thinking. I've been involved with a group called the Resilience Alliance since I was in grad school back in the 1990s. And we've been talking a lot about social and ecological resilience, the connection between both the earth and the human communities and how we have conversations with each other. And I love this image. So I want you to think about a boat that is on the ocean, and it's docked in a calm harbor, and you have a job, which is you have a glass of water in your hand, and you want to carry the water, the full glass of water, from one end of the stateroom to the other. And you need to do it rather quickly. You're trying to give this water to somebody. That's your goal. If you're in a calm harbor, you walk quickly, and the more quickly you can walk, the more quickly you can get that water to the person you're delivering it to. What happens though if you are at sea and the boat is rolling? Now we have a secondary concern. The challenge is not just, how fast can we move towards the goal, whatever it might be, but also how are we going to maintain balance when we have this abruptly pitching floor? The solution now is to find some handholds and some footholds to flex the knees to absorb the roll of the boat. In the harbor, the solution is really quite simple. It's an optimization problem. Walk as fast as possible, but not too fast. At sea, though, the solution requires us to enhance our ability to absorb the disturbance, and that is to enhance the resilience against the waves. So I wanted to give us a minute to have you all just write into the chat, if you would, or on your notebook. What is a crisis that you have had impact your personal day-to-day life? Maybe you lost a job, or your home was flooded, or you had an incident of violence that impacted your community. What was that crisis? And you do not have to write this in the chat. You could if you wanted to. But I'm curious, what are the kinds of factors that helped you stay afloat? Or maybe you didn't stay afloat. How did your situation radically change from one state to another? So just take a minute. We'll give you that time quietly, and then I'll go back to sharing another image with you. All right, I'm looking in the chat here and I'm seeing some answers to this. Shoto said you had soldier surgery, and after a year of trying to recover, you had some factors in your life that really gave you invaluable help. Professionals having access to knowledge about physical therapy, learning about your body, having housemates and other helpers in your life. People talk about having family and safe community spaces, joining with neighbors through an email chain, and having in-person gatherings. So many ways that we have absorbed disturbance and been able to still maintain our life and the basic structure of who and how we are in this world. I'm going to ask you to turn to the next slide, Buff. I'm going to share this diagram. This is something that we talk a lot about in the ecological world, but I think it really makes a difference when we think about the social systems that we're part of. So again, I want you to imagine this now. Instead of imagining a boat that is rocking in the sea, I want you to imagine that we have a basin, and inside that basin is a ball that is rolling around. And our goal is to make sure that whether it's we want to keep the community center alive, or we want to keep the family in its home, or we want to keep our organization afloat, that there's going to be things that impact our organization. We're going to have a funder come out of the rotation, or stop funding us, and all of a sudden that ball is going to rock us. The neighborhood is going to have an issue, and there'll be rocks. The resilience that we have relates to the depth of that basin. And so what the goal is to make sure we keep that ball within the basin and not allow it to go over into this other alternative state. Once it rolls into that alternative state, maybe the organization is shut down, the body has literally physically died, the community has ruptured. And so our goal is to figure out, how do we keep the ball in the basin? How do we build the walls and the structures of that basin to keep us together and afloat and well? I'd like to invite you guys to think about, what is the role of faith communities, local government, neighbors in helping us to protect the communities we love? We're glad to have you on this journey with us as we start to think about building resilience hubs and creating a network of folks that can commit to building a community climate resilience network as we build these hubs. So I will hand it over. In fact, now it's my opportunity to introduce McKenzie. Fantastic. One of the experts that we have met along the way, and somebody we're so grateful for, is McKenzie Jones. And McKenzie is the Resilience Hub Director of the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. And this is an organization that over the past decade has really leaned into this question of how we create resilience communities through the structure of building our institutions into resilience hubs. You have worked extensively in the Native American community. You have been on the ground with hubs across the country. And McKenzie, I'll let you take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Julia. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. All right, great. So as Julia mentioned, my name is McKenzie Jones, and I'm the Resilience Hub Director for the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, which is a mouthful, so we just call it USDN. And USDN is a network of over 300 local governments across North America that are working to create equitable, resilient, and sustainable communities. So we're an impact network, which means that our role is to connect climate professionals to each other and to the resources that they need to make meaningful change in their communities. And my role at USDN specifically is to support communities in developing community-led resilience hubs. So we do that by leading a peer learning group for local governments that work on resilience hubs, as well as developing a bunch of resources and videos. And you'll actually, if you're interested in seeing videos, we've got a great one on Dr. Estelle's work with the Faunteroy Center as well. So tonight I'm going to provide a very brief overview of what resilience hubs are, and then I'll hand it off to my colleague, Dr. Estelle Montgomery, who's doing fantastic work leading the way on resilience hubs in Washington, D.C. And so to start off, what do we mean by resilience, right? That's a term. It can be wonky. It can mean different things for different people. At USDN, when we say resilience, we're really referring to the ability of a community to anticipate, to accommodate, and most importantly, to thrive amidst changing climate conditions. So I think sometimes people use the term bounce back, but we're really talking about the ability to thrive. And next slide, please. So what are resilience hubs? Resilience hubs are trusted community-led facilities, and that's a real important part there, is that they're community-led, that enhance the well-being of marginalized communities before, during, and after a disruption. So they serve dual purposes. They both enhance the quality of life and really build social connection. And that allows them to act as critical facilities that help communities stay safe and respond to disruptions. And most importantly, no two resilience hubs are the same. Yep, next slide. Thanks. So why do we need resilience hubs? We know that marginalized communities experience exposure to climate hazards at a much increased amount. And we also know that social isolation is a significant risk in all facets of our lives, that it's on the rise. But particularly, we know it's a real risk factor during a climate disruption, everything from heat, extreme heat, to flooding. So resilience hubs can reduce that social isolation and build connection. They can shift power to communities to identify the solutions that really meet their needs. And then they can also enhance communities' capacity to adapt. And most importantly, and I think Dr. Estelle, I'm sure will touch on this a bit, in order to be effective, resilience hubs must be led by the community and developed through a process of community decision making. So at USDN, our role is frequently working with local governments to really work with their community and step back and get out of the way so that the community can really lead the way and make sure that that resilience hub meets their need. And we say that because this work actually originated. My former colleague Baja had been working in the city of Baltimore, and I think had been trying to, navigate how to work with communities on emergency management, and really just heard the message over and over again that they didn't trust local government. And so it's really, really critical that these spaces are trusted facilities that already exist in the community. And next slide. Awesome. Okay, thank you. So we talk about resilience hubs as functioning across three modes. And so the first is everyday or blue sky, normal conditions. All services are available. Things are functioning normally. And we're in that mode the vast majority of the time. The next is going to be a disruption, and that can be anything from COVID to a wildfire or flooding, extreme heat. It can be anything, any sort of a natural disaster or social unrest, and it can last from minutes to years. And finally, we have recovery, which is really the aftermath of the disruption, where the community is working to restore to normal or better conditions. For instance, Maui is still recovering from the wildfires a year and a half ago. And we know that Asheville is still deeply recovering from the historic flooding this past fall. And we use what's known as the five foundational areas. It's a framework which communities can kind of treat like line art and then fill in with your own colors and patterns. So for each of these areas, we think about how it transitions from everyday to disruption and recovery. And so the first is programs and services, and this can include anything from, say, a food pantry or workforce development to legal aid or childcare, dance classes. The next is communications, and this can refer to social infrastructure, like how the hub builds trust in the community or shares information through community networks, to more technical infrastructure like Wi-Fi, hand radios, social media, those sort of ways they communicate out into the community. The next is the building and landscape. So is the building efficient? Is it healthy? Does it have the space to accommodate the programs and services the community needs? Is the landscape healthy? Does it filter stormwater? Does it create gathering spaces? Are there community gardens? Does it really meet community needs? Providing shade is a really important piece as well. And the fourth is power systems. So this is something that I think when people think about resilience hubs, frequently they really focus on that power system when it is just a really small portion of the whole all of the, elements that a resilience hub provides. So that power system really can be addressed through a combination of solar plus storage and occasionally backup generators. And it's really intended to provide backup power for a facility during a power disruption. But what we see, during COVID, for instance, is that backup power would not have been helpful in that type of disruption. And then the last area, and I'm sure this is familiar for any faith-based community or community-based organization, is operations and maintenance is really the most challenging. Frequently, people can get funding for infrastructure, but it can be a real challenge to make sure that we have adequate staffing, skills, and maintenance really to operate and maintain a resilience hub long-term. And with that, I will hand it back to Julia. Or Buff, one of you.
Thanks so much, McKenzie. That's a big help. As many of you may have heard from us, thanks to a class at the Humphrey School of Public Policy last spring, Dr. Elise Harrington's group introduced us to the Urban Sustainability Network and got us connected with McKenzie and the work and showed us that this group was really working best practices. So we're really thankful for the partnership with USDN and look forward to working further on these and adding to your groups that that are working across the country. So thanks a lot, McKenzie. I'd like to introduce our next speaker here. Oh, wait, I jumped ahead too far. Oh, no, that must be a couple. Yeah, we'll come back to that. Okay. So Dr. Estelle-Marie Montgomery is the executive director of the Faunteroy Community Enrichment Center, which is the first resilience hub in DC, in Washington, DC. And she brings over 25 years of experience in work and a career that spans multiple continents and countries. She started in biomedical research, and she moved from there to the corporate world in the Netherlands in 1998, and then to independent consulting in 2008. Dr. Montgomery attributes much of her success to her ability to establish trust-based relationships with partners, colleagues, stakeholders, executives, and staff, which we just heard about from USDN. And Dr. Montgomery's work at the Faunteroy Center focuses on addressing systemic issues of injustice by using an equity lens to improve social, economic, educational, health, environmental outcomes through cross-generational programming. And under her leadership, the Faunteroy Center is expanding its private-public partnerships. It's increasing its programming space, 7,000 square feet, installing solar and battery backup, implementing long-term sustainability strategies. So Dr. Montgomery, thank you for your pioneering work in this area. And thanks for coming tonight to share your experiences. I just want to say that Dr. Montgomery is an hour ahead of us. So if you have some questions that pop up during her talk, if you want to drop those in the chat, if we have a little time before she has to leave, we'll drop those. We'll ask her those. So thanks. I'll be watching the chat, and thanks so much.
Thanks, Buff. And thank you, Julia. I want to say the acronym correctly, MNIPL, for inviting me to give this presentation. I'm really honored to be here this evening. I have a lot that I would like to cover, but I'm not going to do that because it can't be much. And I can talk about this project and the work we've been doing, and I will be using the pronoun we a lot because what I am doing is implementing a vision that was clearly defined prior to my coming on board. So just a little bit of a history about the organization and how it all got started. So The F.H. Faunteroy Community Enrichment Center was established in 2013. It was part of a community benefits agreement that resulted from the new development that was put in place on a particular corridor in DC, Ward 7. For those of you who are familiar with DC, it's in Ward 7 east of the river. For those of you who are not familiar with DC, you may not ever have ventured to east of the Anacostia River when you come to DC because no one talks about it. East of the river consists of Ward 7 and 8. These are the marginalized communities of Washington, D.C., and it's quite unfortunate because historically, the community, the folks that make up these communities are those that have served and built up D.C. To what it is today, and still do, by the way. So that's where we're located. And this development that, that was put in place in 2013 on the Nannie Helen Burroughs corridor was the first development in this particular section of Ward 7 since the 1960s. And I give you all of this context because it's very important in understanding where we were and where we are today and everything that it takes to get there, hence the pronoun we throughout the presentation. So as a community benefits agreement, the organization was focused on really providing youth and family programming, and it did a very good job. Located on the ground floor of a mixed-use building, it was well known in that very specific neighborhood for its programming. Around 2018, Washington, D.C. Department of Environment and Energy decided to come to the community, come to Ward 7 to discuss the potential of rolling out a resilience hub. Now, as McKenzie has mentioned, marginalized communities are usually quite suspect of government coming in and asking a bunch of questions. Why? Because government usually comes in, asks a bunch of questions, collect a lot of data, and disappear. They do not address the issues that the communities are dealing with and really are not empathetic when they come through. So the community turned things around. They turned the table around and said, well, we're willing to talk about this, but we're going to lead the discussion. We want to know what resilience hubs are, and we're going to tell you how we think a resilience hub could be implemented and to our benefit, why it needs to be implemented. So those discussions started, and community leaders formulated a blueprint based on surveys that they had, put out, collected data to get a sense of the stressors, the daily stressors that the Resilience Hub really needed to address while also preparing for disruption. That blueprint was finalized in 2019. Actually in 18, and in the latter part of 2019, after that organization known as the Resilience Hub Community Coalition, they assessed several community assets in Ward 7. And community assets, I mean community-based organizations, they felt could best meet the assignment of implementing this blueprint. The Faunteroy Center was one of those organizations, and we were selected. We were selected for several reasons. One, the trust that we already had in the community and the ability for us to expand our footprint quite seamlessly. Well, after being selected in the latter part of 2019, if you all recall, there was 2020, also known as the pandemic. So while no one, and I say no one, outside of the folks at DOEE, the Department of Energy and Environment, the RHCC, the Resilience Hub Community Coalition, many others did not know what was meant by a resilience hub. What does it mean? And worse than that, there was no funding to implement this vision. COVID hit. I was brought in as an external consultant to help the then ED formulate ideas about how the organization could respond due to the stressors from COVID and support the community because everything was shut. Everything was shut in DC. So we wanted our doors had to be shut, but how could we actually serve the community? So we came up with different ways. We became a face mask making factory because face masks were very expensive and very hard to come by. 7,000 were made, distributed, perishable and non-perishable distribution. We had a health mobile unit come every week for health screening and when the vaccines and the testing were available to also provide that. So those gave us some real hardcore data points in terms of what response looks like in recovery, in disruption, and also in recovery. Fast forward, the ED at the time decided to move on. I was asked to come on to try and figure this project out. So let me just tell you a few things because I know we have various organizations here with certain level of, capacity and length of time that they've been serving the community. I came into this project not with a background, ecological background, not in as a community organizer, certainly had no clue what a community resilience hub was. And all of this I needed to learn while trying to also transform an organization that was tasked with a pretty big vision and come up with strategies for how we were going to raise the fund for expansion and programming as well. So footprint as well as programming. This is a very long preface, but I think a very important preface. So if we can go to the next slide. You can see from this slide that what we have been doing is sorting all of this out. So since 2021, since I've been on board, it has been the process of translating the vision into how the organization would need to transform its programming, would need to transform its structure, and would need to expand in that build out such that it could meet the vision that the community has. And remember, we're addressing all of the 5 areas that McKenzie has already presented on. And in the process of analyzing this, we realized that we actually have a 6th component called accessibility. We wanted to make sure that our resilience hub, being the first one, we're piloting this for DC, so it is quite the landmark project, was very inclusive. It was inclusive for those that have physical disabilities, but also disabilities associated with visual and hearing impairments, that they could come into the space and still be able to access the resources in the space in a very meaningful way. So we'd like to think that we are basically in this phase 2 process because we are in the process of the build out and we have piloted a number of programs. And so we're pretty set in terms of where we believe we are positioning our programming. And I have to say that the process of doing all of this, we had to really lean into what are we good at? Where have we collected our wins, right? This is where our superpower really lies. And then how can we build from that? We had a grandiose vision. We still do, and we are realizing it because we had the capacity space-wise to say we're going to make this actually the most robust and ideal resilience hub, potentially in DC, so that we're touching on all areas. So as more resilience hubs are rolling out, we would have had experience with all of the components, and so we could speak to that. So really leaning in on our superpowers helped us to really establish our pathway to success. And then also realizing that we will not be able to do this alone. Always thinking in terms of the abundance that exists. And so we partner. We do not reinvent any wheels. We see how we can partner with other organizations who may not have a brick and mortar, but have brilliant ideas in programming, and how we can bring this together and create a very rich offering to the community. So that has brought us a lot of richness in how we do what we do. And then the other thing that we do is really listen to the community, continue to listen to the community. So although a blueprint was put in place, it's not static. We recognize that things are in motion. And we recognize that as we are putting things in place, we must look for the wins for everyone, the wins for our partners, the wins for our organization, the wins for the organization, and the win for those directly impacted by whatever programming and response that we're putting in place. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to give this visual. We are on that, if you look where that white or silver car is located, we occupy that ground floor, okay, all the way almost to the corner, right before the subway. Next slide. This is the build out that we are in the process of accomplishing. We're going from 2,000 square feet, which was basically the lower right-hand corner, to more than 7,000 square feet of program space. Again, we have the space, and so we are doing this. We recognize that not all organizations would have the space to do this, but we do want to become that example location. And you can see on the right-hand side all the various programming components that we plan to have in the space. One thing to keep in mind is in our design, each space is designed for day-to-day programming, but also designed for how we could transform that space during disruption and what type of disruption. So multifaceted perspectives were put into this design. And as with everything that we've done, everything that we've done has had multiple layers that we've had to consider. Next slide. And of course, resilient power systems. So we do have solar and battery backup as part of the project just to complete it in its totality. Just as exciting as all of this, next slide, please, is how we have formulated our programming. So all of that build out in space would be supporting this slide. Going from left to right, this is the story of how we are building resilience and creating sustainability intergenerationally with environmental literacy, so that ecological component as a cornerstone for all of our programming. And again, the self-determination of the community is central to what we do. We have our programmatic pillars that speak to economic mobility, that speak to health and wellness, that speak to preparedness, and that speak to community cohesiveness. And the impact that we're looking to have is that we are addressing daily stressors. Our day-to-day is not smooth running. Our community are dealing with marginalized issues of inequity. So the day-to-day programming are aimed at repairing these stressors. And we are managing the other impact that we're looking to have is the management of acute disruptions or major disruptions for that matter, COVID, for example. And so looking at how through self-determination, we are building economic mobility, community cohesiveness, as we keep the community central to all that we do. And I wanted to also mention that with each of our programming, we constantly survey how the community have experienced that program. So these circles are in constant motion and moving. Nothing is static. Nothing is static with our private partners. Nothing is static with the technical assistance we have with DC government. Everything is in flux. It's dynamic. It's agile, because that's how we can continue to robustly respond to the community. So I've said a lot, and I'm going to stop there, Julie and Buff, because I think I can go on and on and on, but I'm going to stop there and answer any questions.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Wow. Yes, for those on the call, we had the pleasure of several weeks ago meeting with Dr. Montgomery to discuss her speaking here, and I just got off our phone call with a lot of inspiration and excitement for doing this work. So thanks again for that. Julia, did you have any? I didn't see a lot of questions in the chat. Looks like one was fielded by McKenzie. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
I'll ask a question. I'll
Yep.
start this off. Dr. Montgomery, your institution, obviously, you've had a lot of interactions with local government, you've gotten some funding, you've worked with all these different community organizations, but in essence, this is an institution where people can come from the community and be part of a team to make things happen. I'm wondering if you could talk about a little bit about the nuts and bolts. How often do people meet? What are their challenges? When you say it's dynamic and it's always changing, like, what does that look like in the life of a person who's engaged?
So let me just say our core value is excellence with, by, and for the community. And what that means is that with our growth and expansion, we look to the community to fill in those resources. We know that the community is a gifted community, is a talented community, and a highly educated community that sometimes haven't been given a chance. And I'm using the word community to also mean individuals, right? So we invite the community to come in and be part of our expansion and to bring their creativity and their indigenous knowledge to the table. Okay. If we're looking for a resource and we can't find it in the direct community of Ward 7, we'll expand to east of the river. And if we can't find it there, we'll go to the greater DC. And only if we can't find it in DC will we go outside of DC. And I mean that programmatically, but even throughout the build out. So what does it look like in terms of people coming together? It looks very different because we have a vast array of programming. So when we're looking at our environmental literacy programming, it's centered around a lot of preparedness, and environmental literacy in the midst of folks who are dealing with daily stressors. How do you get someone concerned about recycling, upcycling, climate change, when you're not quite clear when your next meal is coming? You're not quite clear on how you're going to pay the rent. You're having issues with the school system because they're not serving your children well. You're having issues with your career pathway, your job, because you've hit, a wall and you can't figure out how to get beyond that, but you want to, but no one has ever shown you how to navigate that. Right. So the finessing these necessary environmental literacy conversation takes place in the context of serving youth, takes place in the context of family programming, takes place in the context of responding. We have paid electrical bills for people. We have clothed children. We have clothed adults. We have an unhoused gentleman that knows he can count on us to come in, to be warm, and do what he wants to do behind the computer in terms of he's very intelligent and he searches up all sorts of information. And he knows that he's safe with us, right? So we all engage in conversation there. So, and then we have people who volunteer. And those who volunteer come in and feed in even more information that they're getting from the community. So when I say it's changing and dynamic, it's more so in refining and improving what our offering looks like. So I hope that answers your question.
You know what I want to say, it does and it doesn't.
Okay.
Because of course, every place is going to be different in how you set up the structures of those. And so what's so exciting for me to hear is how it worked in your place. And I'm inviting people who are out there thinking about, what does it feel like what would it feel like for my church or synagogue or community center to become a resilience hub? You know, the answer may be very different for you than in terms of, forming groups and task force and stuff as you did in DC. And yet at the same time, what you're saying is that you brought the community in.
Yeah, so let me just speak to that. So we're going to be reaching out to the faith community. And the reason why we're doing that is to expand our ability to serve the community by bringing them into a component of this resilience incubator, right? Which is the brand, how we've branded our resilience hub. So they may say, wow, we would love to be the location where you expand that summer youth programming. And in that way, are responding to the needs of the community as well, and now becoming part of this bigger umbrella, right, of a resilience hub. So each organization in the community can really focus on a particular area in that way, and then grow from there, right? Just because we've asked them in a very specific area doesn't mean that they can remain there. If they actually enjoy it and they want to expand further, then I'm going to go back to their superpowers and the structures that they have in place so that they can seamlessly expand.
Beautiful.
Oh, that is fantastic. Well, thank you so much.
I see there's some questions here. Would you like for me to quickly address some of these questions?
Well, I think you have addressed some of the ones about the community, and some of the questions are directed at specifically at some of the resources that we're going to provide coming up here still on the call tonight.
Okay,
So
wonderful.
for the sake of time, I'd like to kind of move ahead, but I really appreciate you taking those calls, those questions. Maybe the last one that you could take while we're queuing back up the slides is just you want to share a little bit about your funding mechanisms and
Yeah,
how
I
you,
saw
how you
that.
kind of, yeah.
Yeah. So we have been the build out is almost a 50-50 ratio between federal funding from the Community Project Fund under HUD and local DC funding. So the Department of Energy funded the solar battery backup project, and we have the Department of Economic and Planning that provided us with over $1 million for the build out. So the build out project in totality is a $3.6 million project, and we're fully funded for the construction, which includes the solar and battery backup. And then programmatically, we have federal funding from NOAA and also local funding as well. And we're just launching our donor program. So we're looking to ramp that up so that we have the diversification of funding. And we're looking to also expand our service offering to also have an income stream there for professional services based on, the knowledge that we've acquired, and the monetization of our spaces, not to the detriment of our programming, but we do know of some quiet moments where we can have private industry use our space.
Oh, that is fantastic. That is really helpful and so robust. You all have done such a great job with that.
Thank you.
I think if we were a crowd in a room, you would hear an enormous amount of cheering and applause. Thank you so much for taking your time to speak with us and share all the great nuggets of wisdom. I know we had a lot of questions in the chat that we weren't able to get to, but please know that those questions are helping us build the kinds of information loops that we know we need to build this network. And we have the support of USDN, and I hope we can call on you again, Dr. Montgomery, as we face some of these challenges here in Minnesota. We're so grateful for you. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I'll go ahead and answer some of the questions on the chat before.
Oh, great. Thanks. Okay, great. Well, I want to turn here to Minnesota and our two key staff who has worked on these issues and have some things to share. First up is Joshua Lewis.
Awesome. Thank you, Buff. And thank you, Dr. Estelle. It was really powerful to hear the ambition that was channeled from your like understanding that okay, I don't have this organizing experience, this public health, this organizational spirit experience, but we have this location. And ultimately, what you dialed into was an aspect of problem solving in a communal sense. And I want to impart to everyone here that there's a lot of terminology, there's a lot of vocabulary that may get thrown on these presentations that I might be guilty of using as well. I know I've had the privilege of presenting in front of some of you in your congregations or networks over the past year, a couple of years. And I want to say that by no means does that mean that this is something that has to be complicated. To simplify what it is that we are doing here as a community, is we are engaged in a process of improving our capacity, our cohesion as a society. And one word that I do want to leave you with is social capacity. Now, social capacity is documented in peer-reviewed research. One of such study, in fact, is the Chicago heat wave study, in which during a heat wave in Chicago, two communities with very similar socioeconomic vectors were followed through a heat wave. Now, these two communities differed in their social capacity. Now, social capacity, I like to use a metaphor to define. There's a whole social capacity institute, and there's hundreds of definitions, but the simple understanding of it is it's the cohesion of a community. It's how that community congeals. And I like to compare it to shopping for bed linen. You want that bed linen that's made out of the higher material and has the higher thread count. And ultimately, having a high social capacity means that your community is really well interwoven. So the discovery post that heat wave in Chicago was that the community that had high measurements in social capacity ended up having far fewer deaths, far fewer heat strokes than the other community. And what does that mean for the work that we're engaged in here? We heard McKenzie from USDN speak about how there's a lot of work on the power, the energy, power, and electricity, and there's a huge opportunity there, right? In getting investment from our city, from our state, from the federal government, and also our build outs for our buildings too. But ultimately, with that opportunity, we must marriage it with programming and leadership from our local community to drive through the building and adding to our social capacity and restoring of community that we have. Another aspect, another word I want to introduce for the sake of time before passing it forward to Brett is that of communal actualization. A communal actualization, I was informed of this in really studying some humanist psychology and Abraham Maslow and the concept of self-actualization, which is that 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 drive to fulfill one's purpose. Right? And I discovered that actually Abraham Maslow was a cultural anthropologist, and some say he plagiarized, others say he maybe he interpolated his hierarchy of needs from the Siksika tribe of the Blackfoot Nation here. And I want to give them this recognition. They actually issued a response to Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And in their response, they said that he has that wrong. And part of it is because of this poison of this culture of individualism that's driven here. And in fact, the self actualization isn't where we end at, it's where we begin at. And recognizing, and I see Dr. Timothy Eberhardt is on the call here as well. And I got this information from one of his sermons, and our kin ecology and our relationship with one another and with nature and with earth that it is actualized in its being, in its essence, that it has that intrinsic value, that is the starting point, not the end point. That's the starting point. And then communal actualization is the next step after that. And that is the work that we must engage in as a community to fulfill the needs, including the ability for those actualized individuals to serve their purpose. What we are doing in this process in the Climate Community Resilience Network is participating in that communal actualization, is adding to the capacity of our hyperlocal communities, first and foremost, but ultimately doing that by building capacity across the state. And even with McKenzie and Dr. Estelle being here, building our capacity across the country. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. So we're not competing over resources. So that we're coming together and using our time as wisely, effectively, and efficiently as possible to ensure that things like the disparities and inequities in the Black community that occurred during the pandemic in both forms of death and long COVID, those comorbidities can be prioritized during regular times so that we can ensure that doesn't happen again, so that we can see what's forecasted with climate change, what's been occurring in the global south as well, and that we can start to invest and implement and understand what is coming so that we can be prepared in our communities that are on the forefront, that are our frontline communities, are not forgotten and are not taken for granted. I want to thank you all for being here and being a part of this. And I'm excited to move forward with building this community and adding resilience and protections for our communities together. Thank you. I will now pass it to our organizer, Brett.
Thank you, Joshua, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. It's always daunting to follow Joshua. He intellectually excites me, and then I am the pragmatic guy that has to try and figure out how to explain that. And what I'm going to do is give you an example. And think about these functions you see here. Think about the 5 pillars that were talked about, and think about if this is an example that can be of community building and of resilience building. Is this a resilience hub? I have the pleasure to work in the community I live in, Duluth, and we here in Northeast Minnesota have, in 2014, formed the first regional network of Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light outside the Twin Cities. So we're northeastern Minnesota. We worked in for 6 years, 7 years, relationship building. If you're familiar with Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, you know our shtick. We build relations across barriers, wherever we find them. We try to work on climate action and social justice and meld those two things. We work in the policy space. We try to work on pragmatically and build leaders throughout. And we did that. And then we came face to face in 2020 with the pandemic, as we all did. And in the face of that, in our community, we had 15% unemployment very quickly. We had a service industry that was unemployed. We had those who were most vulnerable, those at-risk populations that were cared for by some of the friends we had made relationships, some of the organizations we were in relationship with were drastically put at odds with finding enough food for people to eat. And in that particular place, in that disruption, working on climate action solely without tending to the needs of people that needed to eat just didn't seem like the right thing to do. So our volunteer leadership turned our efforts towards COVID response. And part of what we did was use those relationships we had formed to talk to the community, to talk to different organizations directly serving people at risk, whether homeless folks or low-income folks, coordinate with them to see what they needed, utilize our contacts to raise resources, whether that be money, whether that be physical structures where we could assemble lunches or bagged meals or assemble bought meals from restaurants, and then get those through our network to those organizations that were providing directly to people in need, in the greatest need. We continued that through 2021, and at that point, we phased that program out as the federal government started to ramp up their food programs, and that need started to diminish. The pandemic became less of a uh, became less of an became less of a barrier to getting things done, and we decided to how did we move back to normal? What did that mean? And normalcy to us meant, well, we had seen the need of all these organizations and the great work they were doing. Can we help those folks become resilient in economically, in terms of how they interact with the community in normal times and prepare for the next emergency? And we started working, particularly in 2022, in terms of trying to help those organizations acquire clean energy, such as rooftop solar. That could be churches, community centers, low income, directly on low income housing. So we think resiliency is something we have been doing for a long time, and we're excited to move into it with more rigor, more academic rigor, more intellectual rigor, and with more structural resources, and using the social resources we know we can find in our communities. With that, I'll turn it back. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett. Thanks so much, Dr. Montgomery, for answering questions in the chat. That's really been helpful. I appreciate you doing that. We are, not surprisingly, running a little bit behind on time. But here's the message that we really want people to get. I'm going to, for the sake of time, forgo the actual breakout sessions. We want you to hear that we trust the wisdom in this gathering, and that it will be, if we are going to succeed at our vision, which I'll talk about in just a little bit, we are going to need everyone here. And you are the expert in your local context. And as people have said over and over on this call, social capacity is the key. It is the beginning point. The technical supports will come, and those are important, and we will find the right experts. But it's the social capacity and the relationships and the neighborhoods that are really going to make a resilience hub succeed. So we want to just underline that aspect of this by asking you, beginning a long pattern in these gatherings that will go through the year, of asking you, what's sparking for you? What are you hearing? What's bubbling up for you? Because this is the beginning of what we are going to be doing, is facilitating communication between all of us as we do this work together. So perhaps you'd just like to drop in the chat the answer to one of these questions, or both of these questions. Is there something that's exciting you tonight that is sparking an imagination for you in your context? Is there a particular gift that you heard mentioned tonight that your community has? Or is there one that wasn't mentioned tonight that your community has that you think would be valuable? Please drop those in the chat. Those will be shared back through the follow-up emails and whatnot, and it will be very important to our ongoing preparation for these gatherings. I'll give you a few minutes to do that as we get ready for the next section, as we kind of come to a close here for the evening. Take time to notice what other folks are dropping in the chat as well. Thank you. Great things coming through here. Thank you. I'm going to move us along to what's next, but feel free to keep answering those, a gift from your community or something that excited you on this call. So here's the MNIPL vision. It's fairly simple. We've got 10,000 lakes. Actually, I think there's 11,000 plus if somebody counted them. We got 10,000 lakes in our state, and we think we ought to have 10,000 resilience hubs. And we think we can do it over what period of time, we're not sure. Every lake's a little different. It's got a little different geology, a little different natural systems. Some things are consistent across all the lakes in our beautiful lands that we share. So some of the things we can help one another with, and some of the things we're going to have to figure out on our own in our own context. But we think it's really important, and we think our congregations and the communities we're connected with already have some of the most important skills, which are the social relationships in their areas, to bring these to fruition, to be prepared and help in times of need. There are going to be some fantastic giant resilience centers out there, the big giant supermarkets of the world. What we think there's an important niche for is the local small corner stores, the places in the neighborhoods that build that tight-knit community of neighbor to neighbor in the local context. We are excited to see some of those big giant community centers being created and being really fully equipped in our state. We know we're going to need that. This work that we're setting off on, the Community Climate Resilience Network, is a network of mom and pop stores. That's your community, your neighborhood, your congregation. We think that's where MNIPL's niche is to support and bring this idea forward. So here's our picture for what we're creating for 2025. We've got these gatherings that we're going to be having. This is our kickoff one. It's just the beginning. We're just getting used to the concept. But we're going to be talking about key aspects of community resilience hubs going forward. In February, we're going to talk about how do we build trusting relationships. Maybe that sounds like something you already know how to do. But we're going to have some folks come together to talk about some minute details of that and to incorporate your feedback into a discussion that really helps us build out what can we do as communities to really strengthen the neighborhood relationships that we have, the relationships with the people that are right around us that might in 15 minutes walk to our facility in a time of crisis. We'll talk about building an infrastructure and power systems. We'll be bringing some technical expertise to the table with some experts along those lines, whether it's heating or solar or any number of things on that with operations and communications, the 5 pillars that Joshua talked about. So be prepared for those. If you haven't signed up for them, you'll be getting a follow-up email that'll have a sign up for that. We're going to build beginning in a little later in the spring. As people have started to get used to this concept, we're going to build a community of practice. And that'll be some specific locations that really want to dig into this work and really want to build a group of facilities that are actively pursuing this so that we can learn from one another and so that we can evidence best practices in Minnesota and share those more widely. And then we're going to build an expert task force. So this will be a group of people in our state, whether they're government officials, technical specialists, financial experts, people that have a mission from their respective agency or whatnot to solve the kind of problems that we think we're going to come up with. And we are going to be able to go to them and ask specifically, hey, we've got this resilience hub in Duluth, in Grand Rapids, in St. Peter, in Minneapolis. How would you solve this particular problem so that we can bring the expertise of these folks to bear on real problems in real time? We've we've got just right out the gates some partner events that are happening that I want to flag. Again, the links for all this stuff and the recordings will be sent out to everybody. We've got January 30th, an opportunity in Minneapolis. There's a Green Team Coalition launch event happening. I think Sean already dropped the link in the chat, but again, we'll be sending it out in the email to folks. We've got a in-person gathering on February 11th coming up at the Sabathani Community Center in cooperation with Cooperative Energy Futures. You can show up for that, 4:30 to 6:30. And then we've got an event coming up on March 18th for Ramsey County folks on the call. And I want to give Uriel Tlantek, who's with us, a couple minutes to just talk about that.
Thank you, Buff. Hi, everybody. Thanks for giving me some time to talk about this. I'm sorry, my voice is kind of going out, but please bear with me. Again, my name is Uriel Rosales Latenchi. I work with the climate and health team with Ramsey County. We're housed out of public health, and we're a fairly new team, and we're just super excited to support residents and various community-based organizations that are doing work on resiliency and at that intersection, right, of climate, health, and health. And so this work, right, is coming out of an urban heat island campaign we had this past summer. That's a big issue where you see a temperature difference between 6 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit between areas that have more tree canopy or areas that have more pavement, right? We're thinking downtown, St. Paul. And so we'll be publishing that data very soon. And so out of that work, we decided to also focus on planning for heat, right, during winter. We have a heat tabletop exercise coming up. It's coming up in March 18, 2025. The heat tabletop exercise basically is a tool in emergency management that lets us take a look, right, at what happens during a heat event and how local government, in this case, public health, emergency management, and emergency preparedness, right, either prepare communications and how, local agencies, emergency response, also collaborate, right, with all these units collaborating to respond to an event. And sometimes, I think, especially with COVID, local government here in Minnesota knew that we really couldn't mobilize or do the work without community partners, right? There had to be trusted community sites between Ramsey and Hennepin. We know we have very diverse communities that speak different languages, are from different places. And so there were many different programs, right, that had to that mobilize, and we had to think in different ways, right? And so out of that, we're hoping that residents in Ramsey County can join us for this tabletop exercise, whether you are part of a congregation, a community-based organization, or just a resident that's interested, right, in building resiliency for this. And so part of this invitation is, it's a whole day thing. We know it might be difficult for people to join us for the whole day, but we would very much like to extend the invitation to folks to be observers, if not players in that exercise, but at least to come network with some of the leaders, right, in emergency management, who, in the case of an event, would be great contacts to have, and just, put faces to names. I added a QR code here. If you have your phone, please use the camera function to access it. But if you don't, I'll add my information in the chat, and feel free to contact me with any questions.
And we'll be sending the link in our follow-up email also, so people will have that.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Uriel. Great to be working with you. I'm so glad that we arrived just a few minutes before the top of the hour, because I do I do want to offer a chance for folks to add questions, or if you want to raise your hand, we'll just let you come off mute and ask questions or thoughts for McKenzie or Julia to kind of finish up our time here together.
Looks like Shoto has raised her hand. Shoto, go ahead.
Thanks. So I have the rural question, and I'm not a church member. My spiritual community is like 5 people online scattered across several states. So I can't mobilize a church. I'm 6 miles from the nearest town. I want you to be helping. I've been going, oh, well, maybe they would, and maybe they would, and maybe they would, because I know I know where the food shelves are and some things like that. But I really want help, and I think I'm not the only rural person here. So,
If you want to take that, or Brett?
Sure. Yeah. Or Brett, you may be in an environment that's more applicable.
Go ahead, Buff. I'll just say that I'm glad you're asking the question and bringing it up, Shoto. And I think there's a richness in rural communities. Sometimes it's not a richness of infrastructure, but there's a richness of social connections that can be drawn upon. And I think part of this is leaning into those social connections and then matching them with kind of on the ground assets. So, Buff, I'll let you kind of answer from there.
Yeah, exactly. I would echo that. I mean, when we look across Minnesota and those 10,000 lakes, there's a lot of that space that is rural of one sort or another. So I think the invitation, whether this is, downtown St. Paul or Roseville or Minneapolis or Edina, or it's small town, or it's, in your context, Shoto, in a rural place, is to first say, who's in my radius, and however you draw that radius, and what's my relationship with them. And if a weather emergency happens, a climate, intensified emergency happens, who am I going to go to and who am I going to help? And then let's figure out, in your case, you may bring some context to the conversation that we haven't thought about, and you'll help everybody in this network get better tooled for helping in the kinds of context that you live in. That's part of what we're doing together. MNIPL is not presenting itself as the expert with all the answers. We are, as we've done in a lot of cases, we're asking the questions and trying to find the resources that help answer the questions. And some of those answers are going to come from figuring out together.
thanks. So I can think of one neighbor that I could check with.
Good. There's your hub. You and your neighbor.
Right, they're only a half mile away.
Yeah. I would love to quickly turn to Earl has asked a question. So are we giving up on slowing or stopping climate change and turning to resilience? That's a question that's deep in my heart. I think it's a both and I think what we have found right now, and especially in the context of the current political reality, is that big, quick answers that are optimized, are not something that we have in our reach right now. What we have in our reach is developing the kinds of communities that can be decarbonizing together and also preparing. So I think that what we need to be doing is drastically growing the size of our communities that are responding to building climate resilient climate action centers. So if you could imagine a resilience hub where there is a team of folks who are going and they're door knocking and asking, hey, what do you need during an emergency? Do you have medication that needs to be refrigerated? That's a, emergency preparedness survey. The same relationship can be built that will help that person weatherize their home, buy into a local community solar garden, come together with others who, have become concerned about climate in a way that they haven't before. So I think we have to do both now. We don't have a choice.
Could I
I also
ask?
wanted,
Yeah, go
go
ahead.
ahead. I wanted to respond to the question Chris Grandgard had asked in the chat, just a little bit about resources and, where are these, when we think about Sabathani Community Center or the Faunteroy Center, big public money going into those centers. Absolutely, we think that you all do need to get the money that's going to help you to purchase batteries and, join into geothermal heat systems. We would love to have resilience hubs that are zero carbon emitters and are also responding to emergency needs. Again, first, one step at a time. Second, we right now have an institution, MNCIFA, that has been set up in order to provide community institutions the ability to decarbonize, with low interest loans, et cetera. Like, we need to figure this out together. We need to ask for these resources to flow to these places first, because they're places of community connection. And so, well, again, as Buff said, while we don't have all the answers, we are here to bring this expert task force together so that we can begin to address those gaps with you. So one of the things that we have been doing is actually applying for grants with institutions so we can get staff in their place. And at the same time, supporting people like Shodo who are trying to build that network from scratch on the ground. Back to you, Buff.
Just I would add on to the great question from Earl and your comments about it, that these, as Joshua pointed out, and as Brett said, there is a blue sky period for resilience hubs where we're not responding to emergencies, and that's where a lot of programming and services come in, and a lot of programming can be helping people become more resilient in their own households, which means electrifying and taking actions that reduce costs for utilities, and those are often climate solutions. So again, the key to these is the social relationships, but it's often the social relationships that help us, share the information about climate action and climate response. And then I also wanted to make sure we gave McKenzie, if you've been hearing any of this conversation and thought to drop a comment in or anything from USDN, we'd love to hear you.
Yeah, thanks, Buff. I think to Shoto's question earlier of how do you start this work in rural communities, it really highlights an important piece, which is that not everyone's going to have the big fancy facilities, and that's true in rural and urban and suburban communities, and tribal communities. But most importantly, it's the relationship building. And sometimes the buildings end up even, getting flooded or being impacted by wildfires. So sometimes the buildings don't end up being able to be used. And so having those social networks are the most important piece. I think this is true for everything. And I think sometimes we can be a little detached about it, but this is where the joy is, right? The building the relationships and having fun with people. Yes, it's good to focus on resilience programming, but it's also great to have dance classes, and it's great to have community dinners, and it's great to do the fun part that makes being a human, connecting with other humans. That is what you should be focusing on, because those are the relationships that will serve you every day in your life, right? Is knowing your neighbors, even if they're 5 miles away. And it will also serve you during a disaster. So I think just really it can seem huge and like it's a big process. And if you don't have a group to be a part of, or you don't have a facility to be attached to, then really what you can start with is just building stronger relationships with your neighbors.
Well, thanks, McKenzie. I can't think of a better note to end on than that. Thank you very much for kind of drawing it all together there. That really says it. Folks, thank you so much for your time tonight. Thanks for your passion for this. Thank you to our presenters and our speakers. We're excited about what's to come. You'll get a follow-up email that'll have all the links and a reminder of our upcoming session in February. We look forward to seeing you all there. That'll have our emails in it. If you have any questions between now and February, any comments, any thoughts about improving these gatherings, we welcome those, and we look forward to seeing you in February.